Oh, we're live. Hello, where's my camera? Hello there. We are live on my personal account because I don't know why, but Jana couldn't get Women Against Feminism working. Just give it a sec for the other guys to come, and I'm going to put the link in the group, and hopefully there's a chat. Wait a minute.
Hi, Sarah. Okay, do I have my sound working okay?
Yep, your sound sounds good. How do I sound on my end?
Perfect.
Fine, that's nice and loud. Have you got headphones in?
I do not, but I can hear you pretty well. Do you think it'll mess you up for some?
It's usually good. It's usually to make sure that there's no background noise interrupting your feed, but you sound okay, so it's all right.
Okay, cool. Yeah, my headphones.
Right, where's my...
This is macaroni.
Where is my channel?
I saw a cat.
Yes, it's my, familiar, goes with my feminist costume.
Funny. Where is my video link? Hang on.
I'm on first coffee of the morning, so...
You're doing great.
Ah, here we are. The link's at the bottom here. Okay. Oh, what's that?
Then.
Oh wait, you're in Chicago, aren't you?
Yes. Give me a moment.
So I hear police sirens. Am I surprised?
Yeah. Do you have a moment? I'll try to find something headphone-like.
Okay.
All right, I'll be right back.
If I have to suddenly go for a moment, that will be because one of my sons has done his ankle. He can't walk on it at all.
Oh,
so, yeah, I might just have to get up for a moment on mute and all that and help him to move. He doesn't have a crutch yet. He just did it yesterday.
Tom, just get Tom in, and then guys, don't go anywhere. Tom.
I got these, and bonus, they're really stylish, so.
Jenna's here. Okay, so.
Can Chani hear us?
Hang on. Why is this?
Technology is the worst.
My bad. I thought that you don't need to install Google Hangouts unless he's using his phone. I don't know why.
Yeah, just click the link.
I know. I don't understand, Tom.
Yeah, it was so easy.
I didn't know that you were a technophobe, Tom. No need to install. I'm sure you don't have to install. I mean, am I making that up, or?
It's possible, I guess, if you've never used it before. I've obviously used it before, so.
Yeah.
It's hard for me to imagine a pre-Hangout world.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
I was using OBS for a while, but so that we could stream it live on Facebook, but my laptop is my husband's laptop, and we keep filling it up because he likes to download millions of audiobooks, and every day I have to delete loads of stuff. So I deleted OBS, and I cannot be bothered to reinstall and configure it again at this present time in my life. I will eventually. Come on, Tom.
The,
okay, let's start without Tom, and if he gets the thing downloaded, then no worries.
Yeah. So I think the problem with Tom might be that he's not using Chrome.
That might be. Oh. Now, in an ideal world, I wouldn't like to use Chrome either. But to be fair, you know, it is making our life easier right now. Google are like the kind of necessary evil at our present time, aren't they?
At the moment, yeah. Just while we're in this little break, have any of you used Discord before?
I have, yes. Actually only for typing. I haven't used the voice piece, but I hear it's really easy. My boyfriend uses it while playing video games all the time.
Yeah, it's not just good for gaming though. It's actually really good now that they have. One moment. Oh my goodness. Sorry.
Right, okay. Okay, I think he's got the message that he needs to use Chrome. I'm sorry, until we have a better alternative, Google is a necessary evil, even though they know everything that we do, and social justice warrior culture everywhere. Anyway, side note. Thank you for joining us. If you are watching on YouTube, I'm going to click the link and see who's here. It's probably not many people because I am using my channel, which has no subscribers, because I don't use my channel to, I've got my Messages for Men account for the event I'm doing with other people on the International Men's Day, and I use it to lurk and watch things. And if you're not talking, can you mute your mic? Chani. Where's she gone? Chani, your thing's fallen down. Can you mute your mic? Look, her house is falling down. I'm watching her put a curtain back up.
Yeah, it could be a big bad wolf of some sort. I'm not really sure.
Oh. Chani! Mute your mic. Jenna's here. Ah, there you are, Chani. If you're not talking, hon, muted.
Apologies.
Cool.
Sorry about that. I couldn't even see it, but I could see the curtains falling down.
For those, and I'm here with Chani and Jenna and Sarah. And me and Chani and Jenna are admins of the Women Against Feminism Facebook group. We don't run the pages. There's two pages. There's a Women Against Feminism page, and there's a Women Against Feminism UK page. Hello, Tom. Please mute your mic until we chat. Mute your mic. There we go. In our group, we've got over 10,000 people. I think it's a little bit over that, maybe like 10,200 or 300 now. And we have Sarah with us, who joined recently. She has her own YouTube channel, and she made a video called Why We Need a Fourth Wave Feminism. Had lots of discussions and conversations with her as a result, because we are called Women Against Feminism, so we obviously have lots to talk about and lots to disagree and possibly agree on with her stance on things. We do let feminists come in as long as they are able to have mute your mic please, Jenna. As long as they're able to have reasonable conversation, we can have discussion and debate with them. Mute your mic, hon. Can you mute your mic? I'm going to keep talking. Anyway, because Sarah kept asking us lots of questions, I just suggested that we have a kind of question and answer session and conversation with her live. Ask us as many things as she wanted and find out exactly what we who run the group think and what we believe, and why we have the group and what we want to do with it in the future. So it's not really a debate, but of course we're going to have difference of opinion, and we will we'll probably go back and forth about that. But it's more a question and answer session for her and for other people who are new to the group and other people who are interested to know exactly what our positions are. Because even though we have a document for the future, as in like, you know, this is what we'd like to do in the coming future, it's a little bit, it's not that detailed, but it does give a good indication of where we stand. Lots of people still come into the group and they don't read these things, and they don't understand, or they're not really paying attention, and then they come in and assume things about us. So we want to make it exactly clear what's going on. We also have Tom Ramsey. He's one of the moderators. Say hi, Tom. You can unmute now, mate.
Hello.
Hi.
Hiya.
I'm excited because this is the first time I'm doing a hangout with you.
You all right now?
So it's awesome to see your face and hear your voice like that. Good stuff. We'll start off by telling you, Sarah, and anyone else, that we started the group with Gina, who is also here, about, I think, was it last, it was like a year ago. It's not longer than a year. And what had happened was Women Against Feminism was started by someone else a while ago, a few years back. It gained media attention and a Tumblr, and they had a domain name, and they had some Facebook pages, and there was this campaign all over the internet of women holding up and Women Against Feminism because, or I'm anti-feminist because. And there was a couple of people involved who are well known in the men's rights circles. I believe that Judgy Bitch, Janet Blinfield, was involved, and so was Crystal Garcia, and maybe someone else I'm not 100% aware of. And then the other person that runs the page and Gina are acquaintances, and Gina asked if she could take over the domain name and set up a group, and that person will still run the page because they weren't keen on running a group, and they weren't keen on continuing the domain name and updating it and running the YouTube channel as well. So she decided to take it on board, me and other people, and then now we've got a team of me, Chani, Gina, another lady called Linda, who's not in the conversation right now, and then we've got Tom and Mike, who are moderators. And for a while we had a bit of a discussion about whether or not men should be admins in the group, because it's called Women Against Feminism. Added that they can be moderators because the group is open to both genders, but it's women who are running the group, if that makes sense. So that's just a bit of background information. So I'll to Sarah now. She wants to ask any question, maybe continue this part of the conversation.
Yeah, no, it sounds great. Well, yeah, thank you again for you all coming together. I'm kind of excited to understand both from an individual perspective how you might have a little bit different opinions for why you've become anti-feminist.
Sure.
Bebe is also quite curious. And then also kind of excited to understand a little bit more what the manifesto and focuses of the Women Against Feminist group as a whole. So I guess my first question, and for whichever admins are willing to answer, why are you, or do you self-identify as an anti-feminist? And is it all three waves that you're opposed to, or are there some elements of earlier ones that you think had merit?
Okay, I volunteer that Chani starts.
Thank you. My own personal reasons for becoming a woman against feminism were to do with my experience in the law, the legal system, the family law system in particular. So I noticed that my father was assessed according to his gender, and that drastically affected my childhood. And excuse me, I'm nervous on camera always. It also affected my later family. When I had children, I was basically kicked out of a domestic violence shelter. We can talk on that more later, but basically the father of my children dropped us off too close to the corner of the street that the refuge was in. We were in the refuge because of the violence of my mother. The father of my children wasn't ever alleged to have been violent. He was my only support person. And my oldest son at the time was 6 years old. He was trying to ask me why we had to leave. And you have to be careful with children and what you tell them. And so I was trying not to answer his questions, but he was, like some kids can be, he was very, very curious. And he asked me, are all men bad? Why do we have to leave? Because you know, even though we were 3 blocks and at least 300 meters away from where the refuge actually was, that seemed like he was a danger to the refuge staff simply because of his gender. And David didn't understand this. It didn't make sense to him. So he asked me, are all men bad? And I told him no, and he didn't understand. So why then do we have to leave? Is Daddy a bad man? And I said, no, Daddy's done nothing wrong. But then why do we have to leave? All men are bad. And then this look of shock came over his face. And he said to me, will I be bad when I grow up? I don't want to be a bad man. And at that moment, all I could do was really hold him. And I started thinking back to everything that had happened when I was growing up. And it did not make any sense to me that we should be gender profiling people that way. So yes, feminism, even right from the very beginning, did have issues that were about rights. So for example, if a woman signs up to the same responsibilities that men sign up to in order to get the vote, then they should vote. It shouldn't be denied to them on the basis of their gender. If a woman is doing the same work, yes, she should be able to do that work and not be excluded on the basis of her gender. So there are elements within feminism that I agree with, but they are basic rights elements. So what I do is I look at rights, and I think that feminism right from the very beginning got this wrong. They focused, instead of focusing on rights, they focused on identity. So they tried to improve outcomes for women and girls. And if we take that approach, we end up with no ending point. There will always be somebody who is doing better than we are. And if that person, if we look at their identity and they are a male or they are a white male, then we will think that we need to give a helping hand to somebody else, or even worse, impose handicaps upon those who are doing well. So it forces us to look at who's winning instead of looking at the entire picture across the spectrum and seeing how men and women play out, how gender roles actually play out. So we need to look at the whole picture, and that means removing the focus from women and putting the focus back on rights. Back to
Yeah,
you,
no, I
Sarah.
think that makes a lot of sense. Thank you so much for sharing your story. You're fantastic on camera. And then, yeah, I'm not sure which admin would like to go next, if they have a different story for how they got here.
Do you want me to go next? Okay, so I became anti-feminist. I think I did a degree in media and culture studies and journalism at university. And I remember learning about feminism prior to university, and I believed that it was about equal rights for women. And then when I went and did my degree, I remember going, because I'm not sure if you're aware, that kind of degree is a BA degree in cultural Marxism. It was very much all about the critical theory and Foucault and all the postmodernist theorists and la-di-da-da. And so I did feminism. I did a feminist analysis of absolutely everything. Me that I don't know what the definition of feminism is and what they believe from their origins. I did 3 years of it. And I only did that course because I wanted to be a journalist, but I didn't do very well my A-levels. I was too busy out drinking and actually, and I didn't get very good grades. So I didn't go to a top level course, and so that's why I ended up on this course. And I remember thinking to myself during a film studies class where we were doing male gaze theory, and I thought this was a load of bollocks, because it was telling me that men view women as objects, and whenever women are portrayed on screen, they are positioned, they are filmed in body parts, and therefore they're deemed as less than. And this was basically the fault of men and of patriarchal systems of control. Thinking at the time was how my friends, when they wanted to go out, they would deliberately dress themselves in attractive or sexy attire, and they would wear makeup, and they would do things to accentuate their sexuality. To myself, nobody is forcing them to do this. None of them really are displaying characteristics of some kind of Stockholm syndrome abused waif person. And so I just thought that the theory completely rejected the moral agency and the ability to make decisions on your own. So that was my first kind of red pill, in a way, into the rejection against feminism. I still held on to the idea and the ideal for a little while. And your mic, hon, because you can hear you typing. It's all right. And still held on to the ideal for a while. And, you know, I was very lefty, as I came from a lefty family, as in both my parents were socialists and would vote Labour all their lives. And I was on a course that was very much like that. I actually ran in the student election to be the vice president media. Prior to that, I was interested in being women's officer. I wasn't really that interested in women's issues necessarily. I just wanted a role that would prime me to become VP media. It was self-serving. However, I had a very lively debate with a young gentleman when I was campaigning, who said to me, "Why don't we have a men's officer? There are some men's issues that are important." And I said, "You know, I completely agree with you. Why don't we have a men's officer?" And I said to him, "Come to the AGM with me and I will support you, and we'll put a motion through to have a men's officer." And he decided not to bother. But then I spoke to someone afterwards who told me that I was completely out of my mind to even think that that would be acceptable or promoted in my university. And that was my first taste of sort of realizing just how bogus this ideology was. And then I remember leaving university and thinking to myself, I'm not really a feminist. I'm I described myself as an equalist because I just thought, kind of term could I use for myself? And then I became more interested in men's rights at some point. And I think that I was always naturally interested in it, mainly because I come from a family background of dysfunctional parents, and there's lots of foster care in my family, on multiple generations of it. And I was going through this stage where I was the more mature person in my family. Both my parents I would describe as kind of immature. There's lots of things wrong with them, but you know, they were both prone to the kind of victim ideology, the victimhood aspect of that comes out of cultural Marxism. And I didn't really know what it was at the time, like in terms of a theory or a philosophy, but I knew that how they were blaming all of their problems on societal structural issues or whatever. I knew that that was just bullshit, and that they were both avoiding their personal responsibility. And then I became very interested in personal responsibility, and I worked in the job centre for a while, and I grew up on a council estate, so I was very much aware of people who are on welfare and the benefits culture, which you would call social housing and whatever in the USA. So all of that stuff, basically, I became quite disgusted by people embracing this entitlement culture. And I started to look at the fact that women in society in general seem to be embracing it more than anyone else. And it really pissed me off. In fact, I think I was quite enraged about it, because I realized that if my mother in particular was a man, she would not be free on the streets now. She would probably be in jail or be homeless. But because she is a woman, she has been treated and dealt with in a certain way by her friends and by other family members and things. I'm not going to go into my personal story because that's irrelevant, but it just became very apparent to me at some point. You know, I did years and years of therapy to kind of become a mature, functioning adult, and with no good positive role models. That became apparent to me, and I started to pay attention to men's issues and men's rights. And I came into men's rights because I was doing some therapy training myself, and I was very much interested in looking at how men recover and how they go through therapy. And I think one of the areas that I was interested in was domestic violence, because there's been domestic violence in my family history, and lots of other people that I've known throughout my life. And I always recognized that it was usually both parties involved in a kind of dysfunctional, addictive relationship. Usually one is there's usually one partner who winds up the other partner because they know they become violent, and then they play against each other. The kind of abusive relationship that feminists like to promote and say that is the norm, which is where, you know, the man is the predator and the kind of controlling, abusive, coercive guy, and the woman is who just, you know, so codependent, can't even think for herself to leave. That is actually the most rare case when it comes to domestic violence relationships or violence-prone relationships. A lot of research into that. And a family member of mine had been going through a very dramatic and traumatic divorce and child custody case, and he actually lost his kids for a while. He got accused of domestic violence that was completely exaggerated. He had one instance of domestic violence with his wife, but she claimed it was like ongoing for like 6 months to a year. It turns out that she had a personality disorder, and there was lots of things in her past that she'd never told him. And he actually lost custody of his kids for a year, and then eventually he managed to prove that it was all fake. Off back to her country and left him with the kids, and now he has full custody of 3 kids and he's a single dad. When he was going through that, he contacted Erin Pizzey, who's quite well known in men's rights, because she's an original dissenter from feminism. So in the 1970s, she set up the first domestic violence refuge, which was a worthy cause. Women in particular, but people in general, needed a way out if they found themselves in a domestic violence situation. And she was quite keen on providing that. She realized that it wasn't a gendered problem, that it was on both sides, and that women was violent with the woman tended to be violent as well, and it was mostly 50-50, or it was a very complicated relationship, and it was called intimate partner violence. The feminists at the time in the 70s were growing their movement, and Erin joined because she mistakenly thought it was about empowerment, and they decided that this cause of domestic violence was ripe for them to manipulate and to jump in and say, right, domestic violence is a gendered problem with men against women. You know, the instances of it being against men is very small, so it's not important. Erin said that she completely disagreed with them, so they ostracized her, and eventually she was thrown out of her own charity. And in the UK, we have Refuge, which is the charity that she was thrown out of in the 1970s. Her story is very interesting, and if you have the time, you should go and research it. She's written quite a few books. She became a fiction writer later on as well. Anyway, she is quite old, and my family member said to me that start a foundation to preserve her work, you know, when she dies. Would I be interested in becoming involved in that? So I said yes. So I started to go and see her, and she's put the foundation project on hold for now, but will continue in the future. And she introduced me to the men's rights world a little bit more, and I got involved. I was lurking online for a while, and then eventually I decided to become more public, and I found a bunch of girls called the Liberty Bells. There's 4 of us, and there's another one as well who sometimes does things with us. And we also have a sub-campaign called Ladies of Philip Davies. And so when it comes to Women Against Feminism, I agreed to become an admin because most women, when they know the truth about feminism, would be horrified, have empathy for men when they're really challenged about it. I think because when I talk to what we call normie women about genuine issues or personal experiences where a man has been wronged, they do show a lot of empathy, and they go, oh no, that's terrible, what an injustice. But they have been led to believe so many myths and the common narrative, and also now there's a huge level of entitlement being promoted, hard for them to see through. So I decided to come into Women Against Feminism to make sure that when women are questioning it, they have a place and people they can talk to. And I would like it to go further than that, but for now I'll just shut up because I've been talking for a while. Tom, why he's here?
Yep.
Okay.
I was going to say, yeah. Tom, if you could, go in for yours. If you could, in addition to telling your brief background about becoming an anti-feminist, explain what drew you to Women Against Feminist in particular.
Okay. So I won't talk for as long as Nai or Chani, just because I'm only doing the moderator role. My journey, I've been fortunate that I've not had any quite as traumatic experience specifically in the gender front, as in nothing which I would consider a violation of human rights, but I have observed a lot over my time. I mean, it's the concept of thinking about what drew me originally to feminism, to the gender approach, was my feeling a bit ostracized in a way in, sorry, I'm rambling here. Basically, because I'm high functioning on the autism spectrum, had a different experience socializing to a lot of people. Sorry, I just got a message from Chani there. Am I speaking? I'm not sure what's going on. All right. Yeah, so from my experiences with school and later university, and particularly with my family, where I went through, well, my parents went through a traumatic divorce, and that completely contradicted a lot of the narrative of what I would later be taught. But what I'm trying to say in a roundabout way is, because of my experience, I developed this kind of need to stick up for the underdog, as it were. And that went out throughout school and uni and things. And during that time, when I was around 16, 17, I thought that women and girls in particular were one of the underdogs, one of the hard done by. And we were studying some feminist books in it, because I did an English and history degree and A-level English and history too. So we did a few things like Angela Carter's The Bloody Chamber, which was one of my first exposures to feminism. And at the time, I loved it. But as I went on, particularly from university and seeing experiences, there were a fair few contradictions, particularly between what was being explored in these books and in the theories and what I'd see in the real world. And increasingly it seemed, particularly during uni, that it was certain types, it wasn't really ever women, it was particularly certain types of guys who didn't fit in, who were not fitting as well. Right. And part of this, it related to my connection with my father. So basically, I can't really beat around the bush. Both my father and I, we were a bit out there. We were a bit of shy and nerdy at the time. My dad worked overtime, 2 jobs, while my mother had a bad back for several years, basically. And for a long time, their marriage was okay. But at an eventual point, there seemed some change in my mum, which meant that she started disrespecting him, basically. And it was largely coinciding with her being exposed to a lot of this kind of like girl power media, basically. I don't think it would be fair to call it the feminist theory as such, because it was more the popular women's empowerment thing from music, from films and things. So she started feeling basically that she deserved more, and I think at some point she felt that she was above my dad, basically, So he was getting mistreated. I would not go as far as to say it was domestic violence or abuse or anything, but it was definitely a mistreatment. And this contradicted a lot of what I had been, partly socialized to believe, which was that because women were being discriminated against, that they were more vulnerable, that they needed more compassion. It didn't make sense. The turnout of it, I don't want to go into too many details, and I don't really want to present my mother as a horrible person, because we are on good terms, but it did take a long time. She did, however, because my dad's reaction to this was a nervous breakdown, she managed to get custody of us and the house. So he hit rock bottom, and then I had to kind of mentor him for some year when I was around 16, 17 to help him rise out of this depression. Obviously, it wasn't me alone. He did eventually get help. Whereas my mum seemed to be handling it pretty well. She met a man who has gone on to be my stepdad, so they've remarried. And I know all of these sound kind of self-centered in a way, that partly the experience, the need to protect my dad, to protect the underdogs, but then this conflict, because being on the spectrum and being shy, I had been bullied in school, and it had been particularly in the very early days. I had some pretty negative experience with young girls, which had messed up part of it. But I thought the solution to that was that I wasn't strong enough, I wasn't good enough. So I developed this kind of self-improvement complex, which you can see similar in a lot of the dating, the self-improvement and things throughout. So this formed a lot of my character throughout the years. It was the combination of relentless need to self-improve, which eventually hit my own nervous breakdown, basically, when I was around 18. And the need to protect the underdog, which included women. During the breakdown, I obviously was referred to therapy. So I experienced a lot of mental health service and became quite interested in the emotional world, the psychological world. That also helped with trying to understand neurotypicals. I didn't know that I was on the spectrum then. I just thought there was something strange about me, or it was my anxiety or something. But in part of that led straight into feminism, saying that one of the big problems in the world is that men can't talk about their feelings. And I know that you would have heard this a million times, but I thought, well, my experience was that every single young man I had ever seen who had been on the sensitive side was pushed to the side, and it didn't matter what the women identified as, except for sometimes teachers, like female teachers or things. Their peers were rarely ever particularly compassionate about it, and a lot of this, but conflicted with the feeling that maybe this was just me whining or something, and I just needed to get out there, and the whole man up thing, basically. And the fact that I had gone to an all-boys school, so I was behind with socializing with girls anyway, even though I had friends. All of this led to doing a lot of research. Basically, I didn't realize it at the time, but it had become an obsessive special interest, which meant that I delved into all these different realms of gender politics, including feminism. I got exposed to some of the more sexist ideas from within the pickup artist theory, and because though there was some perverse, horrible sense in some of what was being said, I rejected it personally because I had, largely because I had tried to resolve some of my issues through a relationship which went through the downside, and partly because of the whole guilt over this idea of having this information, which apparently was what one, but it was clearly horrible. It was treating people horribly. I thought, okay, well, the fact that even something has come out like this means that something is fundamentally wrong with the way that most people embrace relationships and culture. And I thought, okay, so there must be some form of brainwashing going on. Maybe I've been brainwashed. And I got exposed to one particular guy on these forums who was very big on agency. He hated all the pickup stuff, which again I wanted to discard because it just was not my personality. And he was big on saying agency. He was saying, well, the problem with that was that they assumed that you should, that even though it's clear that there isn't much empathy for men and boys, the solution to that is not to just suck it up, but to actually treat women as people. Now, feminism always says treat women as people, but in my experience from seeing both all the media out, from the books that I had read, from the analysis which I made, basically at A level, I got top marks for doing one of my analysis of the Bloody Chamber, and it was literally just finding a way to make a woman either a victim or empowered over a horrible man. And that went throughout. And like I say, it was a running theme that even though they said treat women as people, there is a way that men can, because of the ruthlessness, I mean, that there is actually sometimes more compassion and care for women from men towards women than there is from men towards men, which I thought is odd. Why were other guys competing like this? It didn't make sense, and bear in mind that I needed to try and understand it from this neurodivergent perspective, where I needed to see what everyone is how everyone is socializing and fitting into this kind of analytical formula, which I didn't understand, but manage it with emotional conflicts, which everybody has. So yeah, this guy got me big on the agency. He led me to some of the links, and then it led towards what Natty has already talked about. One of the things which really got to me because it resonated so much and made so much sense with what was wrong with these theories was the information about the domestic violence shelters and the abuse. The fact that there was in the state, in the UK and America and Canada in particular, so most of the English-speaking countries, there's this a priori assumption that the woman is the victim. It doesn't make sense. It was instituted, I believe, by the Clinton administration, the Violence Against Women Act, and it meant that there were cases where even when the woman was a complete abusive narcissist, all she needed to do was call up to say that she was the victim and she would be apprehended. And I thought, okay, well, this couldn't be right. I would ask a lot of feminists online from all my conversations, and they would say either that's not true feminism, or they might be oblivious to the legislation, or there were some, and they were on the radical end, the ones who seemed happy about it. They saw, basically, they were like, not so much about the legislation, but about this idea that if a man suffers, then that's actually a good thing. And I thought, okay, even that, if that is extreme, then what are the moderates doing to do about it? Because bear in mind that I was in this strange position where I was simultaneously exposed to all of this, you would call it outright misogynistic ideas, but I had also got a really deep pressing, I'd feel a kind of emotional meltdown going around if I didn't protect the underdog. So bear in mind, sorry, I've got lost on my train of thought. Can someone remind me what I was actually saying?
You were going through your journey into
have I lost you? Did I just go off on a crazy trip?
Well, to be honest, I was just about to go and get some prawn scampi because I'm hungry, but
okay, right. I've
been fascinated by this so far. I don't know about Sarah, but maybe it is a good time for Sarah to jump in anyway, because you do talk a lot, Tom. I love you, but you might be worse than me.
Yeah, my thoughts are just jumbled at the moment. So, okay. Yeah, Sarah, go on. You've got an idea, basically. It's the idea, what are the moderates doing about this? And the moderates were either not doing anything and saying that's not true feminism, that's the radical end, that's the man-hating feminism, or they would...
I'm going to get prawn scampi, I'll be back.
All right. So that's why I thought I became particularly protective of men.
Sorry, it was still a bit broken up. I couldn't quite hear what you said.
Or
I heard what you said, Tom. I couldn't quite hear what Jenna said.
I think Jenna might be having a lot of trouble with her microphone.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Yeah, Jenna, I'm not sure if there's, I'm terrible at technology, but anything you can do to adjust your microphone, or else, yeah, it just might be hard to hear you. Yeah, so yeah, Tom, did you have anything else that you'd like to add, or should I kind of like segue to my next questions?
I'm happy for you to segue. I'm just saying that basically it's the fact that culturally there is so much bias towards women in terms of what the media said who we needed to protect and things. It was the combination of this narrative that men should man up and things, and that women were victims. And I thought, well, the man up thing is supposed to be traditionalism, so why is it all over the media? Why is it even all over feminist media? Why is it in most of the theories? So it's just that I have really struggled to find a actual movement within feminism which treats men and women, as they say, as adults, equally accountable and worthy of equal empathy, but also equal responsibility. And until I can find one, I'm going to be advocating for men's issues and trying to help correct the policy. The Doolough Model and Violence Against Women Act, among many others, which you might know about.
No, I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think one of the reasons why conversations like this are really helpful is, at least for feminists, we often don't have the context of how people get to be against feminism. And so I think it's sometimes overly caricatured to be entirely perceived as just woman hating, in part because there is like a lot of misogyny that gets kind of mixed in with the reasonable points. So I think it's, yeah, great to hear individual stories. And what I was going to ask next is talk about a few elements of feminism that I think are important, and kind of get your take on how much of that overlaps with gender equalism or men's rights activism, and how much you think is antithetical to that. And so I think the first major piece that I think everyone, although there's a lot of disagreement for what exactly feminism is and what exact policy each one of us subscribes to, I think one of the key pieces is this idea that gender roles are outdated. So there's like one aspect of that which talks about how we feel like women shouldn't feel like they have to be submissive, they have to be meek, they have to have the home domain, and we feel like men shouldn't have to feel like they need to be aggressive, they need to be the provider all the time, they need to man up, not be emotional. And so at least for that theory, I think part of what feminism is trying to do is unlock people from those gender roles and enable them to let's get 0% beer. Enable them to fulfill whatever their kind of objectives are, whether it's being a housewife or being a CEO based on their skills and passions. Is the concept of breaking down traditional gender roles to some capacity values that you guys share as well? Or do you think that the more traditionalist approach is a more key element of your personal gender philosophies?
Can I answer that, please? Can I go ahead and answer that?
Yep.
Jana, if you can hear me, could you please mute your mic first? Because it's causing a fair bit of interference. What I'm concerned about with gender roles, regards to gender roles, I'm opposed to enforcing gender roles, most definitely. But I'm concerned that feminism is interested in imposing a non-binary gender role on people who are actually quite comfortable within their gender role. So I think what's important is that we enable people to express themselves, whatever that is. So people like Tom, people like myself, should not feel shamed for not meeting some mythical ideal, which is constantly changing anyway, when it comes to being, you know, the perfect expression of male or female. I don't think there really is any such thing. I think that most people are going to have their own preferences in who they find attractive. They're going to have their own preferences in what they wish to do. So as long as we enable people to make choices that are right for them, that's fine. And that doesn't involve shaming people who are heteronormative, or whatever the particular term is for people who are comfortable in their gender role. People who are masculine and like to play football, that's actually okay. And it's okay if certain women find those people attractive. We shouldn't try to intervene to correct that. There's nothing actually wrong with that. It's, as long as it's reciprocal and voluntary, it's a healthy arrangement. And we should just let people be people, but that also includes people who might not be particularly typical. So with people like Tom, he's incredibly interesting. He makes great points. He's well educated. I see that as an expression of masculinity. And I know that there were times in Western culture when that's exactly what happened. So people like Isaac Newton, for example, were seen as very manly. They didn't have to be rugby football players or gridiron players. They were men. They understood that they were men. Women worked. She didn't have to be the image of the princess standing there 2 steps above the man with the sword and him kneeling before her, and her having perfectly manicured fingernails, and hands. And she didn't have to be that in order to be a woman. So myself, I was incredibly sporty. I loved science. I work in IT, and I don't feel there's anything that makes me masculine. That's a perfectly fine representation of femininity for me, and there's nothing stopping me from doing that. That's the ideal. So, Natty?
Yeah.
Sorry, I wanted to jump in there. I very much I get frustrated with the obsession with masculinity, which the feminists have started, and now has been taken up with guys like MGTOW and the neo-masculinity guys who like Rush's site, and those guys, like, they have the right to express themselves anyhow they want. I don't care. But what I mean is, we've become obsessed with this concept of what masculinity is and what it isn't. observed in the past. I've watched a bunch of old films, and when you look at kind of thespians and guys who are in the performing arts and guys who were traditionally doing certain kinds of role jobs that were not masculine in a butch way, always still respected as men, and what they were doing was still seen as masculine, but they were different types of masculinity. They were individuals to be men, and some of them were able to emote a little bit more like a woman, where they like to, you know, relate with emotions, and some of them didn't. And like it's really ironic that since feminism has become the dominant ideology and narrative in the West, that the definition of what is masculine has actually become very small, and now we are obsessed with completely changing our identity instead of being an individual with different nuanced parts. So, you know, I just wanted to add to what Chani is saying. This concept about masculinity has become extremely defined, and it's actually the result of and postmodernism, in my opinion.
Yeah, so I think some of that might be the challenge of the language. And actually in the video that I just made, like top 5 phrases I think feminists should stop using, toxic masculinity is number 1, because I do think it's a bit confusing. And I actually entirely agree that there are multiple different types of masculinity or aspects of personality that men can have. I do think though that it wasn't feminism that kind of created this male archetype of being the provider and the football player and beat up the nerds and man up and don't express emotions. At least in my read, that's something that has not existed forever historically, but has really codified in the past 50 years. And that feminist goal is not to say that men can't be like that. And if individual feminists make it sound like that, that I think is not part of the core theory, but they're saying that, yeah, men and women should not be confined to these recently constructed, you know, He-Man and docile woman archetypes. And I'm kind of curious, Tom, based on what you said, it sounded like you did feel like there was a lot of pressure to be that aggressive provider, etc. And at least, again, in theory, I feel like feminism is trying to break that down, and it's more traditionalists and anti-feminists who I hear calling men beta cucks and saying that like women are being too manly, that feminists are butch lesbians. I see them much more reinforcing those stereotypes and feminists trying to break them down. So irrespective of the other flaws of feminism, Tom, I guess since you are the man on this call, I'm just curious if you have anything to add.
Okay. So obviously, as you've already pointed out, I felt that I didn't really fit in, and that was the kind of gateway with feminism. But even though I was being told that it is okay to be this way, it was almost all entirely by mother figures in terms of teachers, in terms of therapists, in terms of counselors. So it felt great, but at the same time, it was patronizing, and it thought, okay, well, this is a bubble. This isn't actually what happens when in the reality. And I don't really want to make it sound like my entire advocacy now is hinged upon just plain insecurity, because there's been quite a transformation in the last few years. But just in terms of the path there, that did mean it. So then we went from that to the hyper-traditionalist stuff, which didn't fit in with me entirely. But in my trying to understand that way, I basically indoctrinated myself in this kind of evolutionary theory, the stuff which you, Sarah, would stand against. And I thought, okay, well, this was completely unethical, and this was horrible, and I just hated it. And I went through a massive tension with my dad over it, because he reached a similar conclusion that masculinity can be expressed in many different ways. But because of the environment and the sense of where I was, I thought, okay, this was it. And yeah, that was a snake oil end. That is I do not even think that's the men's rights end. I do think that the whole pickup culture is a product inevitably of the sexual revolution. I do not think that it is feminism alone, but that is one of the problems, that we have a culture where feminism combines, and sometimes it's happy that it combines with traditionalism, so that it's almost cherry picking the parts. And this is particularly the case with the mainstream media, certain sites. But anyway, so I went from this hyper traditionalist, and basically I tried to work this with my failed relationship, but it just resulted in needs for social dominance status games. It absolutely ruined it, and I extremely hurt my ex. So that led to, okay, I can't do this. But because of my Aspie brain, I thought, well, I need to debunk this. It doesn't matter how shitty and depressing and horrible a worldview is. I need to logic it out. So again, with the special interest. And that's when I started thinking about epigenetics, that you can have evolution in culture. And I think on one hand, you have a feminism, particularly radical feminism, which seems to want to pathologize binary gender roles, the standard. And you see a lot of traditionalists, particularly in the likes of the Bible Belt. I know that you've seen that we've got some Christian traditionalists on Women Against Feminism. They react quite strongly. Now, I'm not that. I'm more of a progressive men's rights advocate. I wouldn't like to use the term progressive because I have my own issues with progressivism. I would not say I'm entirely anti-cultural Marxism, but I recognize the fears of that kind of analysis. Basically, I can recognize the pitfalls. And so I've incorporated the idea that you can believe in gender fluidity and people do not need to be shamed for gender roles, but that does not mean that you need to be a feminist, because legislatively, feminism sticks to the gender binary. If you look at things like the Doolof Model and Violence Against Women Act, they're rooted in the belief that men are agents and women are victims. Now, if feminism is against this, it needs to address that. It needs to be that if a woman is being abusive, then she gets treated. But for that, the legislation needs to be eroded. You get similar with, there's a case of Mary Coss, who defined it. So men cannot be raped, they can only be made to penetrate. And again, it was, but women could rape. So, and again, with shared parenting, there's the assumption that women are supposed to be primary caregivers. So there's the assumption put forward by a large feminist organization, National Organization for Women, that the woman should receive custody. Now, it's always said that patriarchy is responsible for the fact that a mother is put in. Sorry, right, I'm rambling here again. Basically, it is the National Organization for Women who said that a mother should receive custody when it said that it's patriarchy. So I'm just giving various examples of where the legislation in particular, and sometimes I do not think that it is actually grassroots feminists, but it seems to be the legislation, and particularly the most powerful talking heads and the radicals. It's actually reinforcing the gender binary at the same time that it is claiming to want to dismantle it. So I am completely for the people to have the right to express however they wish. I am slightly on the LGBT spectrum. I've never done a Kinsey scale of it, but there's I'm sort of bisexual because I'm neurotypical. So I understand all the appeal of intersectionality, and because of the underdog, the fact I do not want people to be held to these roles. I don't think that you you need to identify as feminist to believe in the fluidity and the right of people to express as they wish. So the fluidity of gender performance, if that makes sense.
No, I think that makes a ton of sense. And for me, I think that's a good example where I think, first of all, you don't have to be a feminist to believe that gender roles should be fluid, and there's multiple kinds of masculinity and femininity and kind of that whole package of things. But I think that, at least in the theory, on the spectrum of feminist to anti-feminist or to traditionalist, I think that it's more at least part of the stated goals of feminism to break that down. And I think if we were better at breaking that down and kind of making a compelling case alongside anti-feminists that we shouldn't stereotype people in such a way, it would break out some of those laws, like the idea that only men can commit domestic violence. It's still not something created by feminism. It's something created by traditional perspectives of men versus women. Same thing with the idea that women should be a caregiver. I don't think that feminists created that. I think, if anything, feminists just haven't adequately reshuffled things, at least in my opinion. Like when I see the way our laws, which were created by men who had very traditional perspectives on relationships, and I'll let Natty talk in a second because it sounds like she disagrees, but at least it feels to me for something like parenting and women getting custody, it's because women were perceived to be better caregivers. And also I think there was some validity in the fact that at least 30, 40 years ago, men were working a lot more and women were the caregivers more. And so there would be a challenge in kind of giving 50-50 custody when that's not how the relationships work. However, that's changed, and I think both the laws and feminism should be able to evolve with that. But again, I don't think that the essence of feminism is to be just opposed to men in all cases. So I think if we're being true to the spirit of recognizing different formats, maybe not. But I'll now let Chani go, and then Natty after that, who I think probably has some perspectives on the core of feminism.
Thank you. I think that what feminists, grassroots feminists, need to realize is that when they say that they are a feminist, they're actually supporting the legislation that was lobbied for by feminists that gives women custody in most cases. So the position of the National Organisation for Women is that women should get custody simply because of their gender. So I don't think that most feminists actually realise this. So if we go right back to when was the alimony law? When did the alimony law come in? That was a law that was lobbied for by feminists. So this idea that
and do you have like a sense what decade it was then?
It was early 1900s. So the idea that men made these laws misses the fact that women feminists lobbied for them. So you could say men gave women the vote, but women lobbied for it. So it's not this case that that men are only voting for things that benefit all men. That's not the case at all. The issue was discussed, debated in parliaments all around the world. So we have alimony laws in Australia, the United States, the English-speaking world at the very least, and there's probably a lot of it in India as well. Anywhere where feminism is active. And what we need to recognise is that feminism basically devalued the role of motherhood, of being the full-time carer. What they did was they said that this is something that lowers the value of a woman because she stops working. So they only assess value in monetary terms. They look at a woman staying home, caring for her children, as time that she could have spent in the workforce, earning money, even if she didn't want to do that. So there was a study done recently in Australia interviewing new fathers, and the belief going in was that fathers forced their wives to stay home and be the stay-at-home parent. It turns out that the majority of fathers said the reason why they didn't go back to work, the reason why they went back to work, and not their wife, was partner choice. So it was the woman's choice to stay home. At the moment, with our family laws as they are, women can't actually make that choice and have it respected by a court. So alimony is currently calculated according to how many years a woman spends out of full-time employment. And men know this.
I did not know that. Wait, so then
I
it's
didn't
better
know this until recently either.
So the woman gets more alimony if she's out of work more, right?
Exactly, exactly. So if the man stays in full-time employment and even increases his hours after the birth of a child, which is what generally tends to happen once a man becomes the sole breadwinner, his wages increase because he's putting in more hours, he's working harder, getting better jobs, etc. And the alimony being calculated according to how much time a woman spends out of the workforce is something that men are aware of, that women on the whole are not. And this is why we have the huge chasm, or we until recently had a huge chasm between men going their own way. Have you come across them in Women Against Feminism? So men going their own way have basically decided to avoid all relationships. Some of the men who are going their own way actually are in relationships, and they got married before they became MGTOW. So it is MGTOW. Sorry, it is possible for a married man to also be MGTOW. And we had one of them explain it to us recently, how the alimony calculations affected his marriage with his wife, who obviously loves him dearly. So he had seen many of his friends destroyed, and his family members after a marriage breakdown. So they'd ended up basically destitute. They'd lost everything because the woman had been out of the workforce and they'd had to pay alimony. They lost custody of their children and they had to pay a large amount of child support. And it basically left them with nothing. They ended up homeless. Many of them attempt suicide under these circumstances. So what this man did was he got online and he started asking, how can I protect myself from this? And the advice online for men is to ensure that the woman has no time out of full-time employment. So this is why MGTOW men have a problem with traditional conservative women. And I'm not sure that traditional conservative women, or even any women for that matter, really understand that this is of primary concern to men when they're thinking about going into a relationship. So what it's effectively doing is it's taking the choice away from women who would like to be a stay-at-home parent. And it's taking the choice away from men who would like their wife to be the stay-at-home mother. People who are what I call child-centric, because there is a lot of research that shows that it's best for children if there is a full-time caregiver at home.
Yeah, so I think that I learned a lot just from hearing that, which is great. The one bit that confuses me a little bit, and I'm going to kind of ask to learn more, is it sounds to me like the way alimony was set up in the 1910s was to value women in the home and to kind of recognize that if a woman's not working, she's spending time and effort taking care of the children. That has financial value. That means she's building a relationship with them, which means that she should get more custody. And I can kind of understand how in the always bad situation of divorce, that would be a more appropriate way to set it up versus, giving the woman who's working the whole time the larger alimony payment. So I guess my question is, how would you do it better? What do you think is a more fair way?
The problem is that it removed the choice from a woman. So a woman an adult woman, no longer has the choice to say, okay, I choose to be the stay-at-home parent.
Because her husband's afraid of paying alimony?
Not
if they
just
get
because her
divorced?
husband's afraid of paying alimony, but he is afraid of having people view him as it's almost predatory. I think that the fear is that they will be preyed upon by women who are just there for the alimony. So I would suggest that couples be able to make their own relationship contracts. So
like
we know
a
that
prenuptial agreement, or does that not cover alimony?
at the moment, most prenuptial agreements are thrown out of court. So, and I think that really doesn't recognize the agency of women. So it is, in a sense, it is the state stepping in and saying, no, you're not allowed to agree to that. You're not allowed to agree to what you're comfortable with. This is going to be your lot right here. You have to be awarded alimony. So the problem is that people go into relationships often as a traditional woman. This happened with my mother. She decided after having kids that she didn't actually like being a mother very much. And I remember conversations between my mother and my father where my father was suggesting that she go to work. And she was horrified by that suggestion.
Because of not enough feminism?
No. She was very much introduced to feminist concepts. She just saw it as a job, and she didn't want to have to do it, and she didn't have to do it. She wanted to be taken care of. She just simply became dissatisfied. She regretted her decision to have children, and she wanted somebody else to be responsible for that. So instead of going out and working, I remember her response. It was absurd. Why would I work? You should work. But then she was very angry that we were having home brand pasta and things like that. So she didn't really understand the concept that she could contribute to the family income. She didn't have to. Whereas a man often, he just does it. You know, well,
Yeah.
the woman doesn't want to work. I've got to keep her happy. And so my mother went off and played tennis and did pottery classes and fell for the pottery teacher and then abandoned us. And because she had that time out of work, I came home from school one day and there was a for sale sign up out the front of the house. And I think a lot of men in particular have seen their friends go through this. They've seen their father go through this. And it's a traumatic, I mean, the rates of divorce are so large. And so they are going online and discovering that the only way that they can really be sure that she loves them, that she is staying there because she loves them, is to ensure that she's in full-time employment, always.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting kind of like different set of alignments, because I think that some of that story, I mean, it sounds like your experience with your mom was incredibly difficult on your father, but I think something that feminists would be equally frustrated by, that she wasn't kind of willing to work and like have self-determination, at least from my understanding of feminism, that I think may not align with the theory, but aligns with kind of, as Tom was talking about, the vast majority of actual feminists who aren't really well-versed in the theory, where I think a lot of anti-feminists know more about it than we do. We still have sort of those like core concepts of fairness and advocacy. And I was going to say more, but I think Natty's been wanting to talk a little bit more about the philosophy. So would you like to say something, Natty?
Yeah, I can. Should we go back to that stuff, that MGTOW and traditionalism stuff later, I guess?
Yeah, we can put a pin in that, because I'm curious, about your kind of like philosophy versus practicality today versus historical of feminism.
Okay, so I think earlier Chani kind of already made the point where I was shaking my head. I can't even remember now. It was oh God. It was about men making the laws. And she made the point already quite eloquently about how feminists have been successful lobby groups for quite a long time. And to claim anything else is completely bogus.
That's a good point.
In the UK especially, we have had ring-fenced money for Women's Aid, who are the main kind of, they're like the UK, even though we have now here as well. But they have ring-fenced money for the refugees, even though that's actually been reduced recently because of the Equalities Act, ironically. But
good, a good thing.
Well, that's a good thing, yeah, kind of.
Feminism.
Yeah, well, we can. That's another conversation. But like, we also have the majority of the voters now are women. The most successful lobby groups seem to be lobby groups that are engaging in the kind of identity politics world, and that's very much dominated by feminism. You even need to be, you know, a kind of a rich cronyist behind the scenes lobby group, which could be led by anyone, a man or a woman. Or you need to be one of these groups that is deemed vulnerable in society and or, you know, or oppressed. And women are the top group who seem to be successful in that. We've had various things passed in the last 10 years in the UK that have been directly the influence of Women's Aid, and I don't see any evidence that the general public has been asking Women's Aid to promote these changes. So, for example, in the UK we have Listen and Believe, which you have in America as well, under the Violence Against Women and Girls policy, which says that when a woman reports rape or sexual assault, she is a victim rather than an accuser. And when they go and look for the guy who's done it, they are doing it on the basis that her story is true, which is completely new precedent set in the law against any other crime. And it's actually the most ridiculous crime against human rights in our justice system out of everything.
So don't think of regular people who experience violence as victims, because I feel like from a language perspective, I've always thought in every case, if it's a physical attack, it's a victim versus an accuser.
No, it's specifically for sexual violence and sexual assault. Yeah, it doesn't apply to men because, as we have already pointed out, men technically cannot. They cannot make an accusation of rape. They can make an accusation of sexual harassment or assault.
They can't now,
but
though.
They can't be in the UK. I don't think so. If that's changed in the UK, someone can tell me, but I don't believe so.
Yeah, I believe in the US, you certainly can make those accusations, but I agree they are kind of like evolving the definitions. I think what they actually had.
Is that a federal government, or would that be in the various states?
These are good questions. And yeah, this is good inspiration for me to look into it a bit more. I know when I was reading like studies, it was about how they did have male rape as a category, and they now were adding made to penetrate to also be a category of rape by men. And in general, I think it's evolving a lot, but I'd have to look in more, so I won't say anything that I'm not positive about.
So you're saying that men in the USA can now say they can now accuse a woman or another man, or a woman, let's just say, of raping him.
Yes, I mean, I had never known that wasn't the case, but I have always thought it was, so I believe it is still the case.
Well,
but I'll double check and follow up with you.
We can find out about that, but
if not,
in the UK, that's not the case. And so I'm just giving you one example of how a very powerful feminist organization has like a monopoly of influence on legislation in the UK. And the UK voter is not necessarily a representation of the UK voters and what they want, because you know it's a representational democracy where you are supposed to contact your MP and you know say like, I would like you to raise these issues, or you could do a petition or create your own lobby group, but makes the claim that it represents women's rights and what women want and what they need. And there's no real evidence at all that they are representing what most women want and what most women need in the UK.
Do you think they're even representing what most feminists want in the UK? Given how, at least to me, their views sound totally disconnected from like my sense of reality and fairness.
In the UK, only 7% of women. Well, there's been two studies done recently. One said it was 7, and one said it was 17. So let's just say 10, just for you know, to amend it and put the say 10% of women in the UK actually label themselves as feminists. I would say that Women's Aid, for example, they claim, the thing is they don't claim to just represent feminists. They claim to represent women.
But it doesn't sound like they've been necessarily representing either.
Well, okay, so that's, and that does lead nicely to where me and you have had conversation previously about what feminists believe they represent and what the definition of feminism actually is. And that's why I said to you that you need to do a video and you need to do an in-depth look at theory and the origins of that theory, because I would make the argument the origins of that theory came before it even became an academic theory, is the view that men have oppressed women throughout human history, and they actually believe that it has been that case throughout all different cultures. They do mention kind of matriarchal cultures in the long distant past, but in general, throughout human history, men have oppressed women, and it has been because men are wanted to control women, and they wanted to have access to power in society, their belief system, and every single type of feminism subscribes to that. If you ask anyone, any feminist, even the intersectional ones now, the definition of intersectional feminism has what I call diluted just a little bit. But if you went and asked those who are proponents of it, they would say they agree with the patriarchy theory analysis of human history and the genders. So they've never run away from it. They just like to try and dilute it and show it as something a little bit more mainstream friendly, because as I pointed out earlier, most people are not feminists and don't understand the academic terms and the definitions and whatever. They think that it's about equality between men and women and the advocacy of women's rights. But that is entirely based on the premise that women didn't have any rights to begin with, and that mainly that men had rights over women. And we in Women Against Feminism say that men and women were both oppressed equally, if you're going to use that word oppression, because then we could have a conversation about what degree people were oppressed or are oppressed. But it completely leaves out all of the different things that men have to go through or have been through in their traditional gender roles, and just their general human existence, their human rights. It completely leaves that out. And the most important point is that it completely leaves out women's moral agency, because every single issue that women seem to have suffered or suffer and find difficult is blamed on the patriarchal system of control. And that is still very prevalent, especially in intersectionality. Intersectionality has removed the moral agency of various groups, not just feminism, but it has removed the moral agency of women even further than it had done in the past. You've got the kind of dissenting feminists. So we've got Erin Pizzey is a dissenting feminist. She calls herself an equity feminist. Christina Hobbs Summers is another equity feminist, and then we've got Camille Paglia. They are basically anti-feminist, but the reason why they do that is because they dissented from patriarchy theory, and they were very much interested in human rights and the empowerment of women, because at the time there was a lot of social stigma when you wanted to become a professional career woman or whatever. Yeah. So that element of it was true, but it's completely embellished, and parts of the story that feminists tell is even mythical, because there have been women throughout existence who have done things out of the family home. It's just that they weren't the norm, and let's be honest, most people are the norm. So, like, you've got your top 10 to 1% of guys who are CEOs of corporate companies. They are not the norm. They are what, like, the feminism likes to blame everything on, the top level men, the alpha males. They are not normal men. Most men are not like them. Most men are not heavily ambitious. Most men don't have the capacity to be that ruthless. Okay. And most women are not like that either. So they've completely taken one section of humanity and tried to say that all men are like that. And when you say that most people who say they're feminists don't think that, I just see evidence to the contrary all the time, especially these days, especially with intersectionality, which I believe has actually made things worse.
No, did you get a chance to watch my first video? Half of it is like how intersectionality has made things worse, or at least
yeah.
So I'm with you on that 100%. It's well-intentioned, but has in many ways harmed everything.
Okay, so what do you think about what I'm saying about the origins of feminism? And you're saying, oh, most feminists are not like that. I'm like, who are you talking about? Are you talking about the proponents of the ideology, the official institutions? Are you talking about the legislation in its name, or are you talking about your everyday woman who has a general job, 30 grand a year? Who are you talking about?
I think that more like generally everyday women feminists who aren't particularly active on social media, but kind of believe in the gender ideology of, sexism to some extent still existing, femininity not being respected as much as masculinity, women being like, there's a lot of data that shows that when girls are 6 years old, they think that boys are smarter than them, boys think that boys are smarter than them, and the parents think the boys are smarter. And even though there's lots of evidence to the contrary, you see this lowered expectation of women's ability to be leaders, politicians, super geniuses. And to some extent, I think that is a self-fulfilling prophecy. It causes girls to be a little bit less ambitious. That doesn't mean it should be 50-50 in STEM. It doesn't mean that women should be forced to be in the workplace. But I think a lot of feminists feel like we've made great progress, but we're not 100% of the way there. And we shouldn't feel the need to stop like where we're currently at. But I think for your question of, I can talk about my personal philosophy on patriarchy theory, but I believe that, as you pointed out, Christina Hoff Sommers and Camilla and I can't remember Erin, I guess you said, like if they're all considered feminists, then clearly there's a sect of feminism that I think cares about the issues that I care about, but is not actually anti-feminist or offensive to you guys. So I think that there's like a melding of the two that I think can apply towards a much larger swatch of feminists than it currently is. Did that make sense?
Yes, it does make sense. I agree with them for continuing to use the term. I think they should embrace the term egalitarian. But they will say equity feminism basically means that they believe in equality of opportunity, which, at some point they think that there wasn't equality of opportunity. And so I have that small disagreement with them on that. But everyone would call them a dissenting feminist. So if we in Women Against Feminism believe that the definition of feminism is belief in patriarchy theory, then if they don't believe in patriarchy theory, then they're not feminists. So I have to think about where to go with that a little bit more. But in terms of what you said about studies to do with where kids think that boys are smarter than them at 6 years old, that study, I would like to sort of view the results of that study, because as we've made the claim previously, there are quite a few studies out there within the realm of gender studies that are completely biased and do not cause and have a kind of hypothesis that they already decided is true before they even get the data.
Yeah, definitely.
Curious to know where that study comes from. But let's just assume that the study is good, and we can use that as good evidence. Say is, even though we have discussed the fact that someone like Tom and someone like Chani are not atypical representations of their gender, you know, like being feminine and being masculine and what those roles are, I do believe that most people are gender dimorphic, and that most people have, even though they are individuals and they are nuanced, we do have enough evidence now to show in the genders. And one of those pieces of evidence is that boys tend to be spread out across the IQ spectrum. Okay. And so therefore there are more boys with a retarded IQ level, like stupid, and there are more boys that are. And so if then there are girls, even though the girls tend to group in the middle, and most girls tend to be average or above average or just below average IQ. So it's a very interesting thing that 6-year-olds might think that, because it might actually be true. And if it's true, then we're going to have to get over it. Because, you know, as another thing that is discussed within evolutionary biology as well, is that boys have more of a motivation due to sexual selection to be smarter. So the boys are going to see, you know, I already at the age of 6, they're aware of this on a kind of unconscious, I need to be smarter than that boy. I need to be top of the hierarchical structure to get the attention of the females. So I am going to work harder to be smarter. And just girls just do not have that pressure. It's just not, it's not there. So if a girl chooses to do it, she is out of the norm, because she's not being pushed to do it from a biological perspective. So as much as I recognize the individuals within our species, I also do accept most of the theories of sexual selection and sexual competition. I see it every day. I see my fellow females who say one thing about men and they do the other. They say that they find a guy who is vulnerable, you know, attractive, but they don't want to sleep with him. They just want to. They want to be his mother or his sister, but they want to sleep with the guy who is more traditionally masculine in a way that shows strength, or in a way that shows that he is able to provide, or whatever, all the traits of an alpha male. I failed to see any evidence to the contrary. I've been reading about this stuff for years now, and I just I just think that most people fall into this category. There's always going to be a small percentage that don't, because that's generally how it is. It always is. But for us to claim that the minority therefore represents the majority is completely untrue. So I think that once we are able to just kind of get over that and say, look, you know what? It's okay that a boy wants to be the smartest and that the girls think he's the smartest. It might not be true. Yeah, it might not be true. But I'm just saying that there's a reason for it, and the reason is not insidious, and that's where the feminists, what feminists get wrong. They think that because this might be the case, that the reason behind it is negative towards women, and it's there because of some kind of weird agenda of men to keep women down and in their place. It's like, no, actually, it's because women find the smartest guys. So they really have, in kinds of sexual selection, they have a huge motivator to be like that and to think they're the smartest, because, you know, they want to fake it until they make it, because they think that women are weak or inferior. It's because they're trying to get the woman to be his sexual partner.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so a ton of really good points right then. I'm going to touch on one or two, and then I know Tom kind of wanted to say something, and then I probably have to go in 8 minutes because I have a little bit of other work to do, so unfortunately won't be able to talk about that more. First, in terms of the child intelligence thing, I agree with you, and I too have kind of seen those studies of the bell curve, which do say that in general, women and men are equal, but men are overrepresented for geniuses and idiots. I think the problem with that is that probably that attitude we have of boys can be the smartest filters into kids from a very young age. And again, that may be true as an overall curve, but it's not true for the individual. And so for me, at least, I think that it's important that for 6-year-olds who don't kind of understand probability distributions, that we encourage them all to realize that they should reach their full potential instead of sort of lowering expectations. And for me, like as a feminist, I think if there is a mismatch and girls think that they can't be as smart when actually they can, that's really just a loss for the girl and kind of a loss for society as a whole. And I also think that we still have this very just, like, for lack of a better word, masculine conception of leadership, where a leader has to be a super alpha male, a genius, competitive. In reality, I also believe in genetic differences between the sexes, and I think that women, as you probably also know, tend to have higher EQ. They tend to be better at empathy. They tend to be more collaborative. And when I kind of think of a political leader, I don't think that it necessarily has to be the most masculine and intelligent. We just think it does. And so that's why we get, in America, President Trump, instead of, you know, potentially another political candidate that might have other more feminine but kind of positive qualities. And I just think in aggregate, you see for me in our political distribution and our media distribution that we're really just prioritizing some traits over others without actually having a good reason why one is necessarily better. But for the sex selection theory, I want to read about that more because I do think it's an interesting case about how men are more driven to be successful, to get laid and to find a wife. And yeah, I need to just look into it more. I think it's potentially a fair point, and I'd be interested in knowing for Women Against Feminism if articles like the ones I talked about and those relevant studies would be things I could post in there, or if that's too disconnected with kind of the Women Against Feminism model to allow. So, and oh, then last thing, I do agree with Tom for what you're going to say about Christina Hoff Sommers and the war against boys. And I think that's really interesting how we have all this data that shows that girls are currently overperforming academically because, again, they are hard workers and they are smart, and we're worried about that because it doesn't make sense why girls would be outperforming. And I agree that we should figure out how to better support boys, but I also think it's interesting how we have all this evidence that says in some ways girls are smarter, but we still don't believe it, which is interesting. Sorry, Nettie. That was a little bit of a rant just because we're running short on time.
I was just going to let Tom talk because we're running short on time. I knew that this might happen because we all talk so fucking much. We'll have to continue this another time.
Yeah, that'd be lovely.
Right. I'll just try and finish off that basically what we're discussing is implicit bias. You're saying, Sarah, that we need to stop assuming the bias. We need to be prejudiced to believe that girls and women are less intelligent than men and boys. Even if the bell curve is correct, you believe that it's at least a mix of nature and nurture, so we can control the nurture thing. So part of that is this idea of infantilization, and I brought up the Disrespect Nobody campaign to prove again how the state, which feminism either has a lot of influence over aspects of it or is enmeshed with as the establishment, actually reinforces that at the legislative level. So in 2015, we had a prevention of emotional abuse campaign called Disrespect Nobody. It was designed for lay people just going on their days, like YouTube ads, to point out about different forms of abuse. But it was all with, again, the assumption that the man is the oppressor, the agent, the dominant figure, and the woman is the victim, the submissive. Now, this clearly has come from, it's a grassroots campaign, either from the government, and I mean, I know it's cynical, but I don't really see the government alone being particularly interested in human rights advocacy. So it's come from some form of advocacy group that there's going to be this bias, and it's mandated by the state. So what I'm going to say is that it's on the responsibility, if there is a concern of feminism to reduce implicit bias, then they can't be selective with it. They can't cherry pick. It can't just be the parts which are going to be beneficial. It's going to need to be the stuff which demands responsibility and potentially accountability from women and girls. So we need to correct that. That's pretty much it.
You want to wrap it up, Nevi?
Oh, sorry. Chani, what have you got to say before Sarah goes?
On the
I'll
studies.
stay on as well, by the way. Don't go unless you have to go.
All right. On the studies, I just had a quick Google for it and I wasn't able to find it, but I will find it for a follow-up.
I'll put it in the chat or the Facebook chat message.
Thank you. Regarding the studies showing the 6-year-old children, the boys believe that they're smarter and the girls believe that the boys are smarter as well, despite evidence showing that girls are doing better than boys, right from kindergarten all the way through to university. There was another study that looked at women's ability to give up. So when we're trying to solve a puzzle, women tend to give up before men do. They seem to have this intrinsic belief that they aren't going to be able to do it, whereas men become more tenacious and apply and try different things. So there's a need to look at that further and see if that is actually biological or if it's to do with nurture. But that is there. So that will affect a woman's ability to excel in areas like STEM. So I might mute. There's some background noise. Sorry.
There was some cool tunes. I enjoyed it.
Okay, sorry, I was just typing. So I've really enjoyed this chat so far, and I knew it would be lovely and mature because we are all so insightful, including you, Sarah, and like to talk a lot, and not enough controversy for some people probably, but I'm sure we can get there. But yeah, let's do this another time.
Sure.
Let's do this another time, and maybe we could do it maybe a couple more times. I don't know. And maybe we can come up with a format that is a bit quicker. But I think that this has been good because we've got to know each other a bit better. And it is much easier to do it like this than comments in Facebook, because, you know, you do miss things that way. So thank you very much, Sarah, for agreeing to do a Q&A thing with us.
Okay, great.
Have a think about some of the points that we put, and we will think about what you said. And I would like to ask Tom and Chani to stay, because if they're not busy, we could just have a little chat with people. A couple of people in the chat were asking some questions, so we can answer those, and also we can just discuss what we want to do and our sort of ideas for the future as well. And maybe, Sarah, you'll see this when you watch it again, because we will upload it to the Women Against Feminism YouTube page. All right?
Yep. Nope, sounds great. Thanks again, guys. I had a great time. Talk to you soon.
No worries. Bye-bye.
I think that was great. I think that was wonderful. Yeah. I'd like to really thank Sarah for coming on and engaging with us. And I think that this shows how we do have common interests. So most people who identify as feminists actually are interested in rights. It's not like there is this huge chasm between us. There is a lot that could be achieved if we spent more time speaking to feminists and they spent more time actually listening to us. So I know there are some who disagree with me, but I'm very happy when people like Sarah come into Women Against Feminism and ask their questions. Some people are afraid that the feminists are just going to come in and try to convert us to their ways, to feminism. That changes, that assumption changes very quickly once people actually get talking and talk about their experiences. And this is something that Women Against Feminism does brilliantly, because we have men in the group as well. And that's no accident that we have men in the group. Women have become detached from men's experiences, and we've become detached from the way in which men's experiences affect us and our mutual interest, especially when it comes to raising children. So I think it's wonderful that feminists can come in and see the way that women and men are communicating and the way that we address issues that also matter to them. So I'd like to really ask all of our members to keep that in mind. Remember that the goal is for us all to have rights and for us to remove imposed barriers and imposed prejudice, I guess.
Yeah, I really agree with your stance, and I think the stance of the group is to concentrate on rights, and that's human rights. And that means that listening to men's experience and observing the fact that they do not have some human rights in the same way that women do, and some of the things that, like, for example, the reproductive rights and presumption of 50-50 custody are two things that can be lobbied for and can be changed. And they're not going to require a whole lot of other changes. If those two things happened, that would make a significant difference. And what's been happening in the whole gender conversation, as you rightly pointed out, Chani, is that men are just saying, I don't really want to talk to women anymore. And a lot of the women are going, fine, okay, well, we're just going to embrace the horrible aspects.
Until they reach 35. And then they start
they change their tune.
Exactly. And that's they shouldn't be hated or shamed for that. I think it's fair to see those women as sort of victims. I don't want to use the word victim, but we all do get duped in our lives. We've all been in a position where we've believed something that we later on realized wasn't helping us or wasn't true. So I think that the main point is that things change, and we're not going to change things by yelling at these women who have come to us and started to say, well, actually, I do want to understand men. It would be best for us to say, that's great that you've reached this point now. Welcome to Women Against Feminism.
Exactly. And that brings me to I have mentioned it, but I haven't proposed it as something official. So we have discussed many times that we want Women Against Feminism to become a more official organisation, and it might have to be called something else and not Women Against Feminism, purely because the word against is a little bit problematic. I hate using that word, but it's a good word for this. And also because, as I discussed previously, Women Against Feminism as a term is like a kind of shared trademark, as in various people are using it. So it might be very hard to turn it into a charity or an organisation. So we are still sort of exploring that. But the way I see it is an international brand that represents those women who are rejecting patriarchy theory within feminism, want to listen to the experiences of men, and they want to advocate for the rights of men that we have discussed previously, to join in their local efforts to try and get those things changed. The other side of it I see is some kind of membership organisation, which is very similar to something like NOW, of its structure, where you would be joining as a member, saying that you are committed to these particular values and these aims and goals. So that is what I would like us to work on together, and we've been discussing it and pushing it within the admin team. That is where we're headed. And one thing that one initiative that I have been thinking about and want to work on towards the end of this year, to start maybe around March time next year, is what's called the Women's Liberation Network of support groups for women who are rejecting feminism, want to find other women who are also rejecting the ideology and who want to work on this together, because it is a little bit like coming out of a religion or a cult, when you've been indoctrinated to believe these myths and these exaggerations all your life, and suddenly you're going, wait, you're questioning it, and you're finding that no one else is looking at this in that way.
Absolutely true. And sorry, I'm going to have to go in a few minutes, but one thing I wanted to say is that there is another group of women who could really benefit from the support of women like ourselves, and that is women whose marriages are breaking down and they're first coming into contact with social workers, divorce lawyers, that sort of thing. I've been in that position myself, even though I wasn't applying for divorce or going even for a separation. It's a very intimidating position to be in. We have social workers who suggest to us that we alienate the father. It can even feel as if they're suggesting we lose our children. You know, it is a very scary time for women. And I think that there is even if it's not intentional, there is a lot of social workers and especially divorce lawyers who contribute to things turning out very badly, both for the men and the children, but also later on in life for the woman. And I know that Karen Strawn has a similar experience to this, and she realised how wrong it was. It was even abusive, and it actually incentivises abusive behaviour in women, which they later on regret. And I think that could even be part of the support group for women, would be helping women to assert themselves in that position.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I completely agree. I think there's room for it to have highlighted areas where we think women will be having difficulty. You know, and when you've got divorce lawyers throwing ideas in their face, and you've got people around them, you know, and they probably just want what's best for their family or their children, and they've got all these different ideas swirling around. It's so easy for people to just, you know, take a turn into entitlement, or a turn into kind of victimhood when they don't need to. And
It's
no one
who
likes playing the victim unless you're someone with borderline personality disorder or something. Like, who doing that?
Well, that's another thing. It actually it ends up leaving children placed in the custody of women who do have personality disorders, who may not be particularly well positioned to handle that responsibility. But that can be covered under the gender neutral family law changes that I would like to see us lobby for, so continue to lobby for. So I'm going to have to get going, but there's a few things that I'd really like to talk about next time, especially with Natty, and sorry, especially with Sarah and with Tom as well. So I think that we should talk about rescheduling another talk, and we'll get on that. But for now, thank you. It was nice to see you on camera, Tom.
Yeah. Tom, speak.
Same. Yeah, it was a great experience. It's been the first time that I've done YouTube video for a bit, or even Skype, to be honest. So
really,
just,
you did great.
Yeah.
No.
Thanks.
Okay. Tom, can you stick around for a minute? I just want to answer some questions people have asked. Is that all right?
Yeah, sure.
All right. See you later, Chani. Okay. So look, this is for our members. There were some questions in the chat. Let me go back to the chat. Sorry. Oh, okay. This is a good point. Actually, it's not a question, but I think. Oh, all right. No, let me answer the question that was asked earlier, and it was by Juniard, our resident Muslim against feminism, who contributes quite frequently to the discussion. So thank you very much. So they ask, why am I think this is directed at me, but I think you agree with my point as well, Tom. Why do I think prostitution should be legalized? So I have given my reasons in the group, but I think you want me to give them now. I think prostitution should be legalized, because I think that when you make a viable industry, because I think it is a viable industry, illegal, then you encourage it to become it, and you encourage it to do things in a dark and insidious way. I think that if we legalize prostitution, then we would have less criminality going on. We would probably have less problems, less vulnerable women involved. We might even eradicate the illegal sex slavery trade completely. You know, those incentives to make sort of black market money and, you know, control women and children and boys as well, and men who are gigolos as such. that the people that are like the coercive pimps and things, motivation to be involved whatsoever. And I just don't see a problem with someone, a mature adult, making a decision to sell sex to someone else. I really don't think it's that much of a problem. Now, saying that there isn't a particular personal issue, or there could be issues with someone who decides to sell sex for a living, they might have some significant emotional damage as a result of that, or that contributes to that decision. But ultimately, their decision, and unless we're deeming that person as mentally retarded, then they should be able to make that decision and learn from it. I would much rather it be regulated like any other industry, and we could take girls off the streets and they could have official and things like that they do in Amsterdam and other places where it's not illegal. And also, the other point I make as well is that illegal in the UK, I think, for men to purchase sex, but not to actually sell sex. Unless you're standing on a street corner, you can get arrested for that. House, a call girl, that's not illegal. It's just illegal to purchase it. So that discriminates against men mostly. It also can discriminate against women if they're buying a prostitute. But so I think that's very unfair. If you're going to make it illegal, you need to make it illegal across the board. If you're going to make it legal, you need to make it legal across the board, not discriminate against one group or the other. I'm a libertarian, so I just don't think that the government should be involved really in this. I think you can still have regulation, and it doesn't need to be forced down our necks by a government body. I think that Gilead said that the reason why they're against prostitution is because it erodes our morality and it undermines the family unit. Or about that. I think that a man or a single woman chooses to see a prostitute, that's completely up to them. I just don't see how it's any different between a person seeing a prostitute and a married person cheating on their spouse for an affair. What is the difference? I don't see why prostitution would make undermine the family unit more than cheating does. I don't really, unless there's evidence for that. It just doesn't make. But yeah, I mean, I guess that's from a religious perspective, and if you believe in sort of moral values according to your religion, then fine, but enforce it on other people. That's my answer, and I think Tom mostly agrees with me, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, you see this with a lot of industries and a lot of products, really. The more that you legalize it, well, the classic one, and I mean, and I know alcohol obviously can be done in moderation, but was the prohibition. They completely illegalized booze, and the result was the immersion of speakeasies and the mafia taking it over. So in the same vein, if you legalize prostitution, then the sex slave trade is going to suffer a real blow for it. If you legalize it, well, we don't know, but one could hope.
I thought there were some more questions. We've got kind of suggestions rather than questions. Ilarian's saying we should talk more about our emotional experiences. I'm happy to do that, but I'm not sure we've got time to do that now.
Yeah, I think we've been going for nearly 2 hours.
Yeah, I mean, my baby needs to go to sleep, so it's like half an hour past their bedtime. So I need to go and get her. But I am enjoying this conversation you're having, basically about our dilemma about what we would call this organisation. And someone says, women for gender harmony, women with agency, women's own way. Wow, I like all of those suggestions. I think women with agency is quite a good one. I like that. I think that's my favourite. Wow is a little bit too, like, women's own way. I think the MGTOWs would be super pissed at us if we did that. Super pissed. Although I have called the support group thing Women's Liberation Network, but I want to piss off the feminists, so that's different. I don't want to piss off the MGTOW. Yeah. But yeah, women's own way and women with agency. I will think about that. Thank you very much, Gerard. Actually, I met recently. Is that the same Gerard? I think it is. He's on YouTube rather than Facebook. He was talking about this idea of developing branding. So we can continue this conversation because we really need to. Is there anything you want to say, Tom, before we go?
I think Sarah mentioned that she wanted to go more into detail with the men going their own way, and I think that is important with to try and bridge it, to try and understand. And I think that a lot of the kind of moderate feminists should understand, because the opposite to it is pretty much enforced marriage. There is a parallel. So at the same time that we can hope to find a way to correct it, so not as many men need to feel that they operate. And I think a lot of the key to this is observing the law, observing family court, and possibly observing these biases. So there is a lot to think about, but I'm confident we can handle it.
Yeah, I think we should attack MGTOW a lot more with Sarah. I'm just, even though she's probably taken in some MGTOW content, and I did sort of warn her about them coming for her on her channel, and they probably have, but it depends. Sometimes someone's flavour of the month, and sometimes they're not. But I do think, yeah, to go into that in way more detail, I think that's something that a lot of girls like her who are just fail to understand exactly what's going on. You know, there's me who, well, we've had many conversations about this. Even in some of the men's rights groups that I'm in, I am distrusted because I'm a woman. The idea that I'm going to infiltrate MGTOW, and I'm going to infiltrate men's rights, and I'm going to take over and make it all about me. There's a lot of that going on, and reasonable and extremely understandable reasons why they're taking these positions. And I just really am not sure that girls of her age, I don't know what Sarah's age is. I think she's a bit younger than me. I don't think she's older than me. I'm just not sure that they've really got there yet. It's like, do you not feel like it's like we're just about to reach a point where all of this is going to come bursting open in society? Like, more than just the internet and social media, like in a kind of...
Well, I mean, it's popping up with all the different articles at the moment coming out from the mainstream. I was just in work today and checked the news of BBC, and it was almost entirely the real was almost entirely identity politics. So we are approaching a break. Well, I don't like to say breaking point, but some form of implosion where something needs to change.
Word. Yes. Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the MGTOW guys I know linked me to that misandry bubble essay ages and ages ago, where that essay says that the misandry bubble will burst by 2020. And then he even suggested maybe 2022, but I think the original point was 2020. And I thought at the time, I was like, oh, come on, it's maybe or something. But actually, the way things are going right now, I agree. So
it is a bit scary how the futurists predicted.
Yeah,
this.
Well, we'll see. Maybe if I could do some kind of bet on it. I don't even know what the event that would be, that would happen, that would sort of prove that the bubble bursts. But today we had a Labour MP pro feminism. So he's his name's what's his name? Oh gosh, let me get the article quickly. Have I put it in my profile or in a group? So basically, a Labour MP in the UK committed suicide today because he was accused of sexual assault. He's a Welsh MP, and he has actually gone against fathers' rights campaigners for presumption of shared custody, and he's encouraged violence against women and girls as a policy. So he's pro-feminism, basically. Okay, and he has killed himself as a result of an accusation done by the moral hysteria of Me Too within Parliament. And I don't know. I feel like it's, but it could be the start of some very serious responses to what's been going on. I don't know if I'm just being hyperbolic, but
yeah, I think that we should strive as far as we can to kind of bridge this empathy gap, because at the moment the hostility in the general culture is an extreme. So I think there's, for example, with something like men going their own way, there are some who are just too far out to reach now, but I think there are others who we know who could still be engaged with to help try and understand. I think on that side, though, also that members of their own groups need to hold accountable the kind of radicals, as it were. So the moderate MGTOW to call out. I hate that term too, because it's a social justice one, isn't it? But to if we've got to assume that everybody is coming in good faith to the project, which is something which I think a lot of people don't. I mean, sometimes you can tell when something is an obvious troll, but a lot of the time it's just people coming with their own baggage or their own biases. And I think there are some people who are a bit militant and ready to jump the gun with it. So we need to remember the human. Where did that come from? I remember seeing that like a few years ago, some phrase.
Yeah, no, I agree. And casualties recently, like one of them I regret a little bit, but what can we do but learn? In particular, in the group, who has tried his best to find something to use against me personally and other admins, but he still sticks around and he still engages in other conversations. So I'm not convinced that he's entirely lost. Yeah, entirely on the other side and far out, like you suggest. And I generally think that most people aren't. So someone just said in how is this anti-feminism forum turning into something that is so reactive to MGTOW? I think you misunderstand us, Gerard. We're not reactive to MGTOW. The general position of is that we support the concept of MGTOW and we understand why it exists, and we're not against MGTOW. I think that the issues that have come up have been that certain types of MGTOW guys have come into the group and they either try to take over or they try to find reasons to accuse us of being feminists in disguise, or that basically we're lying or we have some kind of nefarious agenda. And then they do everything they can to try and prove that. and then they just have a inherent distrust because I'm a woman and other people are women, and they call Tom and Mike and white knights. And we just had more of them than we have had feminists recently coming in and trying to do something similar. Actually, I would say in the last few weeks we've had more women coming in and being combative in that way. But maybe a few months ago it was MGTOWs. So I have every right to stick up for myself and the concept of the group to any pigtail MGTOW guys. I don't really give a shit whether they're MGTOWs or not. If they're being a dickhead, they're being a dickhead. And so I think some of them are like, if I was a woman, you'd treat me different. And that's a completely untrue, because I think you can attest that when a woman comes in reacting like that, I also treat her the same, because she's being a dickhead too. So that's what it is. They don't trust us, a lot of them. That's up to them.
It's important to acknowledge that a lot of the YouTube commentators don't really want to name names because they don't want to witch hunt on me. But the general community, a lot of it is spreading this kind of innate distrust, not just of feminism or the state, but of women. And it's taken the sexual selection theory, which has its validity, as we've discussed, to the extreme. And yes, a lot of it's taken the perfectly reasonable idea, I think, of the egalitarian position of treat people as adults and twisted it into this: if a woman is suffering, then don't give a shit about her, just laugh as she lies on the floor. And I don't stand for that. I think it's a lot more sensible to call out an abusive or violent woman when she is being that way, and to help men who are suffering, who are the underdog, who've been wrongfully persecuted, who are being victimized. It does not make sense to just start poking fun at others' suffering. And I think that a lot of that is the problem with the kind of marketing of the solution to the empathy gap. It's this nihilistic approach when you don't believe there's any hope, then you just start becoming a dickhead. So that's another thing we need to continue to just foster hope. And I really do think, because we've seen in a recent thread when people said they were asked, what's your favorite thing about the group? There were loads of guys coming in saying it was restoring my faith in women, and vice versa. So I think that's wonderful, and we can carry on with that.
Yeah, I really like that as well. And they're like people that don't comment and obviously read what's going on. That gives me faith, because sometimes I just see the same old people and I'm just thinking, oh gosh, is it just them? But there's 10,200 people in the group. So, you know, and we do have this lovely tool from Facebook that can tell us exactly how many people are reading things. And if I go on there and I see, 6,000 people engaged, or sorry, had impressions or read a post, I'm like, wow, that's like more than 50%. Yeah, so okay, well, I better go. Thank you, Tom. It was a pleasure. You on Google Hangout is amazing.
Yeah, you too.
And if any of you are in the UK, please come to Messages for Men on International Men's Day for Men in Eventbrite. All right. Thank you very much for everyone. And Gerard, your comments have been much appreciated. He says that anti-feminism has the best people. Well, I can't disagree with that. And we will do this again very soon. So if you want to watch the video, we're going to upload it to Women Against Feminism YouTube account. This is my personal account, and I will download it and we will put it on Women Against Feminism account. All right, take care. Bye-bye.